we're going to be talking about flamingos. And as you might notice in the presentation, flamingos, I didn't spell it with an E at the end, but it can be spelled with an E. So you can also spell flamingos, Flamingos. So if you do that on your homework or on anything else, or you see it somewhere, that's totally okay. Both spellings are acceptable. So we're going to go through our usual stuff today. We're going to do an introduction, and then we're going to talk about different species of flamingos. We're going to talk about a couple different questions, including why are they pink? And then we're going to do our homework, and we'll go over some resources for you to learn more. So the introduction, you guys still know me. I'm Megan. I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom, and I'm still working at scientist.com, which is really great. And I love science, and I love to teach science. And actually, some of my coworkers know about this class too, and they are working on a blog post to put out about our STEM class. And so that's going to be shared in a couple of different places, and maybe we'll get some new friends that will join us. So we're talking today because, like these flamingos, it's summertime. It's time to party for all of us and enjoy some time off. But it's still important to learn, and our moms and dads are still trying to do work and get work done during the day. So I thought I would still teach you guys a little something, and it seems like you've been enjoying the classes. So with that, we're going to launch into flamingo species. So flamingos are obviously in the kingdom of animals, and they are in the phylum Chordata. So we've covered a lot of things that are in that phylum before. It just means that they have a notochord during development, or something that turns into a backbone, a spine, and a spinal cord, basically. They're in the class Aves, which is what all the birds are in. And then they're a little bit more specialized than that. And you can see here are some examples of what we kind of think of when we see or hear the word flamingo. So does anybody know where the flamingo on the right is from? Does that look familiar? That flamingo is from Alice in Wonderland. So you might remember Alice plays croquet at one point, and she uses some poor flamingos as her croquet mallet. And then we also see flamingos as decorations in lots of different places, right? Because they're fun and they're bright and they're pink, and it kind of says summer to everybody. And they're kind of bright like this, right? And so we really enjoy that. And a lot of people put them in their yards. So there's a flamingo yard decoration there. And of all things, flamingo lawn decorations are actually a big thing in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm from. And tons of people have them in their lawns, and even the university puts them up. And they put out the pro soccer team in Madison has flamingos on their jersey. It's a big deal there. So kind of silly. So you guys hopefully remember from last semester who this guy is. Yeah,
Charles
Olivia?
Darwin.
Yes. And I've showed you guys this picture a bunch because it's really important. Charles Darwin spent about 20 years writing this awesome book called On the Origin of Species that explained the process of evolution, and that no two animals are the same, even if they belong to the same species. So we're going to talk about 6 different species of flamingos. And if those different species and different animals weren't competing to survive, we'd probably just have like one kind of thing on the earth, and that wouldn't really work out because we wouldn't be able to use lots of resources. So those little changes in animals add up over time, and those changes, we can't see them with our eyes because they happen over thousands of years, but they add up to whole new species and whole new branches on the tree of life. So we've talked about quite a few things over here with like mammals, and we've talked a little bit about insects, and today we're going to go back into this branch, which is aves, or birds. You can see there's like an ostrich and a toucan and a penguin, and there's lots of different kinds of birds. And as those birds are being selected for, you guys might remember this part, natural selection and adaptations. When there's lots and lots of species, some individual members of that species or group tend to have really special things going on that help them survive better than everybody else. So then because they're all different, the ones that are surviving better are selected for over the time, or they're more successful. They have more babies, they eat more food, they might travel longer, and eventually those little selections become new species. And so for flamingos, there's actually something I had no idea about that I learned yesterday. And that's that the flamingo family tree is super weird. So when there's a common ancestor here, kind of in the middle of all these lines, and there's different kinds of birds kind of radiating out. And you can see here is a flamingo, and their closest relative is a grebe. So if you guys, yeah, there's some killdeer. Yeah.
There's a street in our neighborhood named killdeer.
Yeah, killdeer are really common birds that we see all the time, right? And they say killdeer, killdeer when they're trying to run away or trying to distract us from their nest. But grebes are a very odd bird. They look sort of like ducks or like loons, and they have some flashy feathers, and they are diving birds. And we wouldn't really think that they're related to flamingos, but DNA analysis has showed us that they are actually their closest relatives. And you can see from this tiny picture, they actually look quite different from what we know commonly as flamingos. So there are 6 different species of flamingos that are living today. There are some extinct species that we won't talk about, but you guys know species is basically a word for different types of animals. They're really closely related, and we like to classify animals so that we can kind of keep track of where they are in the world and how they're related, and we group them according to traits that they have or things about them that make them different. And so these flamingos, there's the 6 different species, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about a little bit about each one of those species for you, because I thought before this that there was probably just like 1 or 2 kinds of flamingo, but there's actually a lot, and they're very different. So flamingos live in a variety of different places. You can see them down in southern Florida and in the Caribbean. You can see them in South America. There's tons of flamingos in Africa and some in India, and actually over here, you can see in southern Spain and some parts of the tip of Africa and there are actually flamingos there as well. So I hadn't considered that maybe Carmen and Inez live in a country that has flamingos. That had never occurred to me before. So the first one we're going to talk about today is the greater flamingo. And the greater flamingo is the most widespread. So there are more of these kind of around in lots of different areas than the other types of flamingo. And on the left here, you see an adult greater flamingo, and on the right is a chick. And these flamingos are found in Africa. They're found in India, in the Middle East, and in Southern Europe. So in Southern Spain, like I mentioned before. And
Mom, can you get me those?
These are actually the biggest of the flamingos, and they get to about 59 inches tall, which is almost as tall as I am. And they can weigh about 10 pounds, so they get pretty big. And the largest flamingos have been recorded being closer to 10 pounds rather than 9 pounds. So they're kind of big birds. And you can see here the baby flamingo has the same kind of beak and bill, but it's gray and fluffy. And you might remember when we were talking about feather types that those gray fluffy feathers that birds are born with or they hatch with tend to keep them warmer, but they don't repel water and things like that. So the next kind of flamingo is the Caribbean, or also called the American flamingo. And this one breeds in the Galapagos Islands, in Colombia and Venezuela, and also in the Bahamas and the Virgin Islands, and then way, way in the south of Florida. So if you go really down towards like Tampa and things like that, you might be able to see some of these flamingos. And these flamingos are a little bit smaller than the greater flamingo, and you can see there are some differences when you look back and forth at the 2 pictures, but I will point out more in depth what the differences are in a little bit. There are also the Chilean flamingo, and this is also a big flamingo that's really closely related to the American or the Caribbean flamingo, and it is actually near threatened. So this one has a smaller population, but it breeds in South America, and it has been introduced to the Netherlands and to Germany. For some reason, someone introduced Chilean flamingos, so you might see some flying around wild in Europe, which is quite odd to think about. You wouldn't think of flamingos living in Germany or the Netherlands. And like all other of the flamingos, you can see here, there's a flamingo guarding her nest and her egg. And these kinds of flamingos mostly hang out on salt lagoons and soda lakes, so ones that are really acidic. but those areas are kind of vulnerable, right? They're in danger of habitat change. And so between that and water pollution, these types of flamingos aren't doing quite as well. So we talked about a greater flamingo. There's also a lesser flamingo. And this species of flamingo is also in Africa and also in India. And sometimes they fly off kind of far from their path, but that's called a vagrant bird. So kind of a wandering or a lost bird like that is one that has kind of strayed far away from its flock. And this kind is the smallest of all the flamingos. So, I mean, it's pretty big for a bird in general, but it's small compared to its brother and sister flamingos. And it only stands around 35 inches tall, so about 3 feet tall. And it weighs quite a bit less, so like 6 pounds. So it's roughly half the size of some of the bigger flamingos. There's also the Andean flamingo. And this one is one of the rarest flamingos in the world. So it lives in the Andes Mountains of South America. And it's really closely related to another flamingo called James's flamingo. And this one lives in high altitude, so way high up in the mountains of the Andean mountains in Peru and Chile and Bolivia in South America. And it's actually named for a British naturalist, so someone that studies nature. And he studied this bird quite a bit. His name was Harry Berkeley James. So it's James's flamingo. And it's really closely related to the Andean flamingo that we talked about just now. This one was actually thought to be extinct for a very long time. And then in, 1956, they discovered a remote population of them and realized that they weren't actually extinct. So they are still really uncommon and rare, but they're not extinct like we thought for a little while. So that's good news. So you might be wondering from my talk of how rare they are if they're endangered or not. And most of them are listed either as vulnerable or near threatened. So endangered comes to the right of this. And you guys might remember this graphic from the giraffes episode. We were talking about giraffes being kind of endangered. And this is called the IUCN Red List of threatened species, or that's what this comes from. And it's kind of a list of all animals and their populations. And we take into account the extinction risk as well as like the number of species and where they live and things like that to determine how close they are to actually becoming extinct. And so flamingos are kind of right in the middle, most of them. They're vulnerable. So vulnerable means you're kind of close to being in trouble, right? Like you could be in trouble at any moment. So the flamingos sit right there. The lesser, the Jameses and the Chilean ones are near threatened, and then the greater and the Caribbean or American flamingo are least concerned, which means we're not worried about them at all. There's tons of them all over the place and they're not having any trouble breeding. So now we're going to get to the fun stuff. So why are flamingos pink, and some other questions that you guys might have. So
I know why flamingos are pink.
Yeah, I'll give you a chance to tell us in a second.
Okay.
So first, how big are flamingos? So I told you guys about how big they were in inches and pounds, but that doesn't really work super well in all of our brains. So this is a cool picture of how big they are standing next to a man who is about 6 feet tall. So you can see here, I said the greater flamingo was about as tall as me or a little taller. I'm actually just a couple inches over 5 feet tall. So a greater flamingo is probably taller than me, most of them. And then getting all the way down to the little Jameses and the lesser flamingos, which I mentioned are closer to 3 or 4 feet. So might be closer to your guys' height for some of you. So flamingos actually are pretty big as far as birds go, but they're also fairly lightweight, so they can fly. Here's another one. How long do flamingos live? Does anybody have a guess? Rhea,
a couple years.
A couple years. Okay, Rhea, what's your guess?
A couple years.
Yeah. What about you, Ava? What do you think?
Maybe like about 10 years.
That's a good guess. So I am going to blow your guys' minds. Are you ready? This picture is a flamingo that is named Greater, and Greater is a greater flamingo that used to live at the Adelaide Zoo. So greater, they don't know if it's a male or a female, and they don't really know where it came from, but it arrived at the Adelaide Zoo in 1933. And Greater the flamingo passed away in 2014 at the age of 83 years old. Crazy, right? So it
So it
arrived,
has the lifespan of like humans.
kind of, yeah. So most flamingos are thought to live 40 to 60 years old, but Greater was super old. And it's actually got to the zoo so long ago that they're not sure where it came from. It could have come from Cairo in Egypt, or it could have come from the Hamburg Zoo in Germany. They can't figure out, the records aren't complete about where this bird came from because it was so long ago. And it was the oldest flamingo and the last greater flamingo that was residing in Australia in captivity. And it actually did have a mate, or another flamingo that lived with it, but it was a Chilean flamingo that's about 60 years old, so a little bit younger. So the average for flamingos is 40 to 60 years old, but this old guy or old lady lived to 83. So now, why are flamingos pink, Olivia?
It's because of all the shrimp they eat.
Exactly.
And the shrimp is pink, so it turns them pink.
Dead on. Good job. So flamingos hatch out of the egg gray. Remember I showed you the babies before, and they're kind of fluffy and gray looking? They look like almost like little geese. Sorry for my cat. She's very needy today. So as they grow, they get that pink plumage, and it's the result of the natural pigments or colors in the foods that they eat. So the pink or the reddish feathers come from something called carotenoids that are in the diet of the animals and the plant plankton that the flamingos are eating. So those compounds and beta carotene are also present in a lot of plants. So we can get the beta carotene from like tomatoes, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, things like that, and carrots. But the flamingos are gathering them from the plankton and the little shrimp and the algae that they eat. So the more and the more pink things they eat, or pink, reddish, orange things they eat, the pinker and pinker their feathers get. So if you look at all the flamingos, some of them seem very, very bright pink, and some of them are almost white. And that's because the levels of the carotenoids and beta carotene in their food differ across regions of the world. So if the flamingos are living somewhere where they're not getting as much of that stuff, they're a little bit paler in color, and they might not be bright flamingo pink. So when these birds are eating, you can see here this nice bright pink bird. It has its head underwater, and what they do is they wiggle their little webbed feet around, and they stir up the bottom of the lake or the water source they're in, and then they duck their heads down with their beaks upside down into the mud and the water, and they filter out that food that they're eating. And I wanted to show you this picture because you can see a flamingo has kind of a scary and creepy looking tongue, right? It spikes almost like a cat's tongue, but a little bit longer. And then they have these tiny ridges along the sides of their beak. And that acts almost like baleen for a whale. So when they scoop up all that stuff and they bring their head up, they can push with their tongue and filter out all the water, and then keep all the food and the good stuff that they want to eat. And that good stuff makes their feathers pink. Okay, so another question you might have about flamingos is we've probably seen them doing this, right? So why do flamingos stand on one leg? Well, actually, this question has caused quite a few arguments between different scientists. So there's a couple different reasons that people think they might do it. One theory is that the birds can conserve their body heat by tucking a leg up into its feathers, so they can stand in kind of cold water, but then, and the cold water obviously takes heat away from your body and can make you cold really quick. But if they have that foot up and it's tucked into their feathers, then they might not get as cold. Another thought is that this might be how they sleep. So they might be tucking their foot up and shutting down the other half of their brain. So some fish especially can put one side of their brain only to sleep. So the other side keeps them swimming so they can continue to get oxygen and live, and the other side is resting. And so people think that maybe flamingos are doing something like this, where they're kind of sleeping with their one foot up, but their other half of their brain is keeping them for one, standing so they don't tip over, and two, watching for predators so that they don't get hurt. So it's kind of like they're half asleep almost.
I know that whales do that.
Mhm.
That one half keeps them up, and the other half of their brain is sleeping.
Yeah, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to go to the surface to breathe, right? So these things are kind of
Yeah.
important. Animals like that can't just go completely to sleep. Like the flamingo would probably tip over, right, in the water and not be able to breathe, and that would be bad.
Or they could just go to the shore.
Yeah, that's a good point. They could do that like most other birds. I'm not sure why they don't. Maybe because of the waters that they stand in, they're a little bit safer from predators. Because a lot of times, remember how I said they were in soda lakes or more acidic bodies of water? That's probably water that most animals aren't going to drink intentionally. So maybe they're a little bit safer there, but that's just a guess. So one of the other thoughts is that balancing on this one leg requires them to use less muscles. So they are kind of uniquely situated where they can sleep on the one leg and balance really easily. Like for us, it takes a lot of work for the rest of our muscles in our body to keep our core tight and our body balanced. But for flamingos, they have a different kind of center of gravity, and it's easier for them to stand up. And so they're actually probably using a lot less energy to just hang out on one leg. So I also wanted to answer a question, how can you tell flamingos apart? And it's kind of hard to see in some of the pictures. So I found this really cool little illustration. And there's a couple different ways that you can tell these guys apart. So the Andean flamingo over here, you might notice that he has yellow legs and none of the others do. So if you see a flamingo with yellow legs, it's an Andean flamingo. The Chilean flamingo, right there, has gray legs with pink knees. So if you say pink knees and feet on gray legs, you're seeing a Chilean flamingo. James's flamingo over here, you might notice his bill is actually yellow. So he's got pink legs like a lot of these other flamingos, but his bill is yellow. And let's see, the lesser flamingo is the only species that has a mostly black bill. You can see right there. And then the greater flamingo is the largest of all the flamingos, and it has the most pink on its bill. See how bright the sky is right here? And that leaves the American flamingo last, or the Caribbean flamingo, so way over here. And that one is typically the darkest or the brightest pink, and it sometimes is almost salmon pink. So you can usually tell that one from the others by how bright it is. So we talked about what flamingos eat, but what do you think baby flamingos eat?
Regurgitated food from their mothers.
Yeah, so that's what a lot of birds eat, right? Their mom comes and kind of gives them some food that she's already chomped on, right, and digested part way. So, which is regurgitated. But flamingos do this really crazy thing that pigeons also do, and they produce like it's called crop milk. So a crop is an organ that birds have that kind of stores food like around their throats before it goes into their gizzard and gets ground up, and before it goes into their stomach for digestion. So it's kind of like a holding station for food. And the flamingo and the pigeon also can create kind of like a milk in there. And it's similar in composition actually to mammal milk, but it's not true milk. It's not really milk. We just call it that. And for flamingos, because of what they eat, the crop milk is actually bright red. So you can see on here, it kind of looks like the chick has got blood or something on it, but it's actually the milk that its mom is feeding it. And it's made by both of the parents, so it can be made by males and females. And because of the red in this crop milk, that's why the babies will eventually turn pink before they are even starting to sift food on their own. And then as they're eating food on their own, look at even more and more pink. So something kind of weird that I didn't realize birds can do. They can produce crop milk, and pigeons and flamingos both do it. I don't think it's red for pigeons though. So finally, you might be wondering what flamingo eggs look like. And I was very curious about this, and you can see this flamingo here is standing on kind of like a mud nest, and they build their nests in like these little mounds that look almost like a volcano with like a little crater at the top, and the crater helps the eggs sit in it, and so it doesn't roll off and get lost. And the eggs look just kind of like real big chicken eggs, right? They don't really look special. But you might have heard a rumor or people talking about, sometimes people want to tell you fun facts about animals. And one of the ones I've heard before is that flamingo egg yolks are pink. And that's actually not true. So somebody took a picture of a chicken egg and colored the yolk pink and tried to say it was a flamingo egg. And that's not really the case. But the cool part is that flamingo eggs actually are kind of reddish orange for the yolk. So when you eat a chicken egg, the yolks are usually kind of a pale yellow color. And that's from chickens that are raised on just corn and whatever feed we're giving them. If you have chickens that are raised outside, say on an organic farm or somewhere else, their yolks might be so yellow to the point that they almost look orange. And that has to do with the compounds that are in their food. So much like the flamingo, the color of feed you give to a chicken and the variety of food can translate into the yolk color. And so my chickens that I used to have, we would give them marigold petals from flowers and it would make their yolks really orange. But because the flamingos are getting so many carotenoids and things in their food, their yolks are so orangish that they kind of look like a little bit red. So they're not actually bright pink like people like to say, but they can be bright orange to reddish. So I thought that was pretty neat because they look different than I had anticipated. But they're definitely not bright pink. That would be cool, but they're not, unfortunately. Okay, so now we're going to get into our homework for later this week. So little kids can choose a picture to draw. You can draw a flamingo, you can draw their nest, or you can draw the food that a flamingo eats. For big kids, you can draw a picture of one of the species of flamingo and label the parts that are different from other flamingos. You can make a comic about flamingos turning pink, or you can write a few sentences about evolution for me. And then for middle schoolers, you can write a paragraph explaining evolution and natural selection. You can draw a flamingo and label some adaptations as well as the differences between species, or you can create a comic about a problem that a flamingo might have. And then you guys can still email your homework to me and we'll put you in the drawing for the gift card. And there's some resources here for you that I would recommend you check out. If you want to read more about Grater, the 83-year-old flamingo, you can click on this article. And then there's lots of cool facts and things. And then the San Diego Zoo always has a really good website where you guys can check